Hello, everybody. It is Friday, September. I can't believe it's September. September the 6th, 2024, for another episode of the Visto Show. And oh my goodness, does the world of Canadian politics and immigration just keep on giving, I tell you. We got lots to discuss. There's a lot of interesting things going on. Anyways, it should be a good episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Hope your Friday's going well. If you're tuning in live on LinkedIn, hope your whatever day it is going well. If you're tuning in after the fact on YouTube, thank you very much for your support. How are you doing? For my LinkedIn Live viewers, feel free to tune in. Feel free to share your thoughts, your inputs, or just say hello. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Hopefully you're having a great day on this somewhat skeptical Friday here in Toronto. It was a little bit gray. Apparently it might rain, but it looks like now the sun's peeking out a little bit. But anyways, we got a lot to discuss on this episode, as you can see from the menu on the left. Number one, huge update coming from the NDP party related to their deal with the Liberals, which we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, I think it was about a week and a half ago, was the announcement to the big change related to LMIAs, more specifically the low wage, and we're going to go through that and its implications. We're going to talk about, of course, recent express entry draws. We had a few of them last week, and we're seeing a definite pattern emerge that we're going to talk about. We will talk about a big feature release from our favorite platform, my favorite platform, Visto. We'll talk about that really quick, how it looks, how it works, all that kind of stuff. And mention the CIPP, Canadian Immigration Pros podcast, and some other important stuff before we send you on your way for the weekend. We have Verinder in the crowd, says, hello, Josh. Hey, Verinder. Hope your day's going well. Thank you very much for tuning in. We have Ken tuning in. Sunny, Alberta, Josh. Interesting, Ken. Thanks for tuning in. I'm excited to hear, hopefully, some of your thoughts on this episode, because I know you have some strong ones, as do I. And glad to hear that things are shining a little bit brighter out west. So without further ado, and by all means, feel free to jump in and join the conversation in the comments if you are watching live. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to follow me over on LinkedIn, because I do this every 2 weeks live on LinkedIn. And the benefit of tuning in live is that you get to, of course, take part of the conversation. Anyways, let's dive right into it. Item number one. Big political move, shift, I don't know, whatever the heck you want to call it, this week. I'm going to put the link in the comments as well if you do want to follow along and read what I'm looking at, or you can just follow along on my screen. If you're watching on YouTube, these links will be in the description below. Big move this week as the Liberal/NDP deal is dead, but that doesn't necessarily mean a fall election according to CBC. Now, really quickly, 30,000-foot high level, from what I understand. Now, keep in mind, I'm an immigration lawyer. I'm not necessarily a political genius or, savant. But from what I understand is that the Liberals run Canada, right? That's why this man right here, Justin Trudeau, is Prime Minister. But the Liberals have a minority government, which means they can't necessarily do whatever the heck they want at all times. What happened was, a couple of years ago, the NDPs partnered with the Liberals and basically said, hey, whatever you want to do, we will vote with you for those important confidence-type votes, right? So for the last while, the Liberals and the NDPs have effectively had a majority government. Now, what happened this week is our friend here, Jagmeet Singh, ended that deal, basically saying that partnership, quote-unquote partnership, I don't know if maybe some of my terminology is off, because again, I'm not a political savant here, but basically saying, listen, that partnership is now over, and we don't, he had some now, I would say if you can, go listen to the actual full video, or go watch the full video of what Jagmeet Singh said, because he said some pretty critical things about the Liberals, which I would mostly agree with. But he's basically saying, listen, we don't think that the Liberals have done a good job over the last few years, so we're ending this deal and we're going to prepare for the next election. But we don't know, part of what's been going. Let me finish this part first, and then we'll talk about the election in just a minute. So anyways, What does this mean? It means that the Liberals don't necessarily have full support of the NDPs for any of the big decisions or votes that might be coming up. And it probably means a whole bunch of other things. Now, probably the most important thing to keep in mind here, and as we see in the headline, is Canada headed for an election? Why? Because if you can get a majority confidence vote to call for an early election, you can have an early election. We haven't had an early election because the NDPs have been backing the Liberals. And the Liberals obviously do not want an election right now because they're doing pretty poorly in the polls, understandably. So what we have here is the ability in Canada to call an early election with a majority vote. Now what we're all wondering is, okay, the Liberals don't want an election. The reason we haven't had an early election, so that if there is no early election, the election will be, I think, in the second half of 2025. Most Canadians want an early election, at least people like me do, because we're pretty frustrated with the Liberal government. The Liberal government does not want an early election because I think they'd probably get ruined if there was one. So the question now becomes, does the NDP want an early election? Yes or no, right? Because the Conservatives obviously want an early election, but they would need the vote of the NDP in order to call said early election. So the big question here is, do we think we're going to have an early election? And I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts. Harding is tuning in. He says hello from Vancouver. Hey, Harding, thanks for tuning in. If you have any thoughts on this politics, early election, not early election, by all means, please feel free to chime in. My gut is telling me that I don't think we're going to get an election right away, because I think what's going to happen is the NDP is going to take a little bit of time to separate themselves from the Liberals and kind of come up with their own messaging and their own stuff, because I don't think NDP is doing amazing in the polls either. So does this mean we're going to have an election very soon? I don't know, right? Ultimately, none of us know, right? Here we have some, like, I would read the full article if you're interested. If I'm a betting person, and I may regret ever saying this, I suspect we'll see a budget election, Turnbull said, suggesting Canadians could head to the polls sometime after that document is tabled in March or April. So my guess along the same lines is we will not have an election this year. I think if I had my choice, I would love to have an election this year, but I don't think the NDP ended this partnership to call an election right away. My guess is what they've wanted to do is separate themselves a little bit in Canadians' minds, right? Because the Liberals and the NDPs have effectively been kind of like bunched together for the last few years. And now Jagmeet and maybe the rest of the party want to separate themselves a little bit from the Liberals, understandably, but I don't think they're ready to send Canadian voters to the polls right now. Again, this is my guess. I could be 100% wrong. For all I know, we're voting next week, right? I don't think we will, but for all I know, right? This is all guessing, and I'd love to hear your opinions as well in the comments if you have them. My guess is this. The NDPs wanted to separate themselves from the Liberals, but, using headlines like this, but they're not going to support an election yet. I think they're going to wait. I think they have, I'm assuming, some plans and new messaging and blah, blah, blah. And they're going to try to separate themselves a little bit more from the Liberals. They're going to try to present themselves and give themselves a little bit of a boost in the polls. And then either maybe, early mid-2025, maybe we'll have an early election, or maybe we won't, and it'll just be a regular election at the end of 2025. So anyways, it's still kind of too early to tell on that front. I think it's interesting. I don't know. Let me know what you folks think. I think that if they were going to do this, they maybe should have done it earlier. Again, this is one man's opinion, myself, but I think they've waited a little bit too long that this is going to have any kind of, meaningful change in my head of where I position the NDP. So that's my opinion. I think if Mr. Singh wanted to do a better job of separating himself from the Liberals, he should have done this earlier, because they've been just supporting the Liberals for far too long, right? So how can you now, in the last year before the next election, last minute, quote unquote, say, oh, now all of a sudden we don't support the Liberals, we don't think they're strong enough, blah, 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 right? For me, it's a little too late, but that's, again, just one person's opinion. Jorge tunes in. Hey, Jorge, how you doing? Confidence and Supply Agreement, I believe it is called. Yes, thank you. This is why we have lovely live viewers like Jorge who are far smarter than I am, especially when it comes to politics. The Confidence and Supply Agreement. Ken says, question now is, can the NDP now actually support the Liberals given his comments? Abhinav says, what are we hearing after the announcement is NDP may not take part in the no confidence vote? So this is all really interesting. Let's go one at a time here. Ken says, can the NDP actually support the Liberals given his comments? That's why I think, Ken, it's a little bit too early to tell, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens next. Because, for example, is Jagmeet just doing this for the big, headlines, but what's going to happen when other stuff comes to the table? What's going to happen if the Conservatives push for an early election, right? What's going to happen when we see other big policies flop down on the desk? Is the NDP going to support the Conservatives or, vote the way of the Conservatives or the Liberals? What happens if the NDP goes through all this, we see the big headlines, blah, 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 but then they actually still continue to vote and support the Liberals, right? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And now Abhinav says we're hearing that the NDP is not going to take part in a no confidence vote, right? So again, they wanted to separate themselves from the Liberals, but are they actually going to do anything to help try and remove them? I don't know, right? I guess time will tell. So this is, again, why I think for me, specifically for me, this is a little bit too little too late, especially if they're not going to support that no confidence vote, right? And I think they're just grasping at straws, trying to get big headlines, which is kind of like what the Liberals have been doing for the last few months, at least in regards to immigration, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. Ken says, yes. Michelle Boland says, I agree. Hey, Michelle, hope you're doing well and glad to hear that great minds think alike, as they say. Ken says, Skippy will find a way to get an election soon. I kind of hope so, Ken. I know that you have, and I'm not going to air all of my commenters' opinions for, on behalf of you on air here without giving you the opportunity to respond. I mean, you can respond in the comments. But I hope he can find a way to get an election soon. Because, again, we can sit here and debate and talk this and that and who's better at this and blah, blah, blah. If you just look at the numbers, this has been a historically terrible 5 years for Canada. More than 5 years, right? But especially in the last 3 to 5 years, especially if you look at things like immigration and cost of living and crime rates and blah, blah, blah. So we can all go back and forth about which party's better for this and who's going to do that and blah, blah, blah. My vote, and this is, again, my opinion, and I'm not talking on behalf of any companies that I own or run or blah, blah. This is Josh's opinion. I think it's been a historically terrible performance by our federal government, and I think that we need a change. That's my opinion. Simple as that. And we can go into nuances about why, but, maybe you don't want to hear me yap about that stuff anymore. So anyways, what I would recommend is, if you are interested in this topic, to definitely do more of your own research, read these articles in full. You don't have to read this article, right? I just pulled one off of Google. But read a little bit more. And I think maybe just as interestingly is, okay, the NDP has done this week, but what are they going to start doing when they have to sit down and vote? That'll be interesting to keep an eye on, and I'll make sure to, continue to keep an eye on it as well, and probably share some thoughts and stuff like that too. So anyways, Ken says, well, there has also been a little thing impacting that called a pandemic. I mean, yeah, Ken, you're not wrong, right? And I'm not an economics major or anything like that. But the pandemic, I don't know. Are we removed enough from the pandemic? And then the other thing we can do is, every country went through the pandemic. So why don't we start comparing our numbers to our neighbors to the south, right? Maybe you could argue that's an unfair comparison. But look at all of our economic numbers and compare them to America, right? Look at the cost of income. Look at the cost of living comparison. Look at the cost of real estate relative to income comparison. Look at the GDP comparison. Look at the crime rate comparison, right? And most of those measures will show you that Canada is doing relatively terrible, right? So again, this is an immigration show. I'm an immigration lawyer. I'm not a political genius. I'm not an economics major. But what I do is try to stay apprised, read the news, try to look at numbers as much as I can, because, numbers can lie in some ways, but in most ways they're pretty reliable if you're looking at helpful numbers. And what I'm seeing is not pretty. And maybe most importantly, and this is what I'll end on, because again, I don't want to spend this whole episode just talking about politics, is I personally, again, highly opinionated, have not liked the way that the Liberals have been leading the country. And I think that whether it be political parties, businesses, countries, families, leadership waterfalls down. And what I mean by that is, if you have great leadership at the top, it trickles down positively. And if you have terrible leadership at the top, it trickles down negatively. And from what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling and what I'm hearing, I personally have not liked what I've seen at the leadership at the top for our country, and I think it's trickling down, and we're seeing it in these decisions we're getting in immigration and stuff that we're going to talk about, and I just am not happy with it personally. Anyways, again, that's just me. I'm always open to other opinions and hearing other thoughts and stuff like that, so don't hesitate to share them here. And anyways, as they say, time will tell, so we'll have to keep an eye out and see what happens. Jorge says the NDP could now have more leverage to force legislation and or amendments through with the threat of triggering an election. That's true. So that's what I'm saying, Jorge. Like, it could be really interesting to see how this affects future decision-making in our government, right? The Liberal NDP coalition no longer exists, quote unquote. So how is the NDP going to vote? How is legislation going to be affected in the future? How is the NDP going to hold their kind of like swing vote over different parties' heads or whatever? It'll be really interesting to see. So we'll have to follow along and see what happens from there. So anyways, interesting stories as always. I'm going to take my patented, if this is your first time watching the Visto show, my patented Segway sip, which I've of course not actually patented. And we're going to move on to the next topic. Major LMIA changes. And especially for some of you in the audience right now who do a lot of corporate immigration, I guess it depends on what type of corporate immigration, this could have very big effects. Of course, well, as you know, probably better than I. But again, I will link this in the comments, so if you're following on LinkedIn or you're following on YouTube, you can follow along as well. But last week, August 26th, the minister made an announcement of reducing the number of temporary foreign workers in Canada. And blah, 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 blue, blue, blue. As usual, we're going to skip the first few paragraphs because it's, pandering. Given current labor market conditions and the fact that there's an election coming up, and to further reduce the reliance of Canadian employers on the program, Randy Blue announced today that the government is taking further action to weed out TFW program misuse and fraud. So wait, I don't get it. Is it because of labor market conditions, or is it because of misuse and fraud? Or is it both? Anyways, we'll get into that. In response to the current employment environment, the following changes will be implemented effective by September 26th, 2024. So that's in about 3-4 weeks from now. The government will refuse to process LMIAs in the low-wage stream applicable in census metropolitan areas with an employment rate of 6% or higher. Exceptions will be granted for seasonal and non-seasonal jobs in food security sectors, primary agriculture, food processing, and fish processing, as well as construction and healthcare. So what does this mean? Now, for those of you who are experienced immigration professionals, I apologize because you know what all this means. But for those of you who don't, I'll just really quickly explain that when you apply to bring a foreign worker into Canada, in a lot of cases, you might need to first apply for what's called an LMIA, Labor Market Impact Assessment. Within the LMIA program, there are multiple different sub-programs. So, for example, the low-wage stream is if you're bringing somebody who's going to earn less than a certain amount designated by the government. There's a high-wage stream, there's a global talent stream for tech workers, there's an agricultural stream, et cetera, et cetera. So the reason why I'm saying this is only one of the streams of LMIAs is being limited, the low wage stream, and only in census metropolitan areas with an employment rate of 6% or higher, with the exception of what they've said here: primary agriculture, food processing, fish processing, construction, and healthcare. So that makes sense, especially because at least healthcare, from what I'm hearing, we're still very much struggling with our healthcare system in Canada. Construction, I've heard mixed things. If some of you have thoughts or opinions, or if you're working with construction companies, please let me know. I've heard mixed things because now builders are slowing down a little bit, so maybe the need for construction workers a little bit less. But anyways, employers will be allowed to hire no more than 20% of their total workforce through the TFW program. I want to say this is a reduction from 20%, but if somebody can confirm in the comments, please let me know. I think for low wage, it used to be 20% of total workforce. Now they're bringing it down to 10%. This maximum employment percentage will be applied to the low wage stream and is a further reduction from the March 2024 reduction. Exceptions will be granted, again, for healthcare, construction, seasonal jobs, and blah, blah, blah. The maximum duration of employment for workers through the low stream will be reduced to 1 year, down from 2 years. So basically, I'm not going to go through every letter of this. You should read it if you're interested. But they're basically taking the ban hammer to the low wage stream, right, is what we're seeing here. We've seen it over the last year, and then you can see there's some stats and blah, blah, blah that, again, you can read on your own time if you're interested. But what we're seeing here is IRCC is taking the ban hammer to the temporary foreign worker low wage stream program. And, I don't know. I have pretty mixed feelings about this. Again, we've seen this now in the last 10 months. We've seen the government take a big swing at the international student industry. They've taken a big swing at the startup visa industry. And now it looks like they're starting to take big swings at the temporary foreign worker industry, more specifically the low wage stream with this. So, yeah, I don't know. I've said this before and I'll say it again, and I posted about this on LinkedIn earlier this week. I think this is mostly political. I think that the government has done virtually nothing to regulate any of these industries for 7, 8, 9 years. They reference misuse and fraud. There's been misuse and fraud in all of those industries. Study permits, startup visa, of course the LMIA fraud, and more. Right now we're seeing it with asylum claims and everything. Why? It's not really rocket science. People misuse and fraudulently act more and more when they get away with it. So what's happened is, and I'm going to get a little bit critical here, but that's why I have this show, because I just share my opinions and you can agree with them or you can disagree with them. The government has done virtually nothing to combat misuse and fraud in all of these industries for 6, 7, 8 plus years. So what happened is that it's proliferated, which means if people realize they can get away with it, they do it more and more and more. That's why LMIA fraud is a thing, because nobody has done anything to combat it, right? So then what happens is you get what we're in right now, which is an overcorrection. There's huge anti-immigrant sentiment in Canada for the first time in a long time because there's been all of this fraud that the government has allowed to happen for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Now, my problem with this is I don't think this is the solution. What the government has done 3 times now, this is the hat trick, is they've just gone in and capped the programs. Now, obviously, they've done a little bit more on the international student side, but the first thing they did was they capped international students. Then they went over to the startup visa and they capped the number of startup visa I don't LOSs. Think this is the solution. They went in and they started capping the number of LOSs. Now they're coming into the low wage stream and capping, or effectively removing the ability in most cases to apply for LMIAs. This still doesn't change all of this stuff. You can remove and turn on and off programs, but what that's just going to do is push people to find other ways around the system. Until you go to the root cause of the problem, a lot of this stuff will still continue. Oh, they moved low wage. Okay, I'm just going to take my fraud and misuse to high wage, or I'm just going to take it to the asylum program, or I'm just going to take it to my TRV, blah. You know what I mean? This is why I don't like what the government is doing. Did some caps need to be put in place? Yes. Do some programs need to be adjusted and tuned down? Yes. But again, what is the source of all of these programs, all of these problems, the misuse and the fraud? This is not actually fixing any of it. That's my biggest concern. I hope that they actually start looking into rejigging the way that you can apply and the way that you have to meet compliance requirements and the way that they actually do audits to see that these programs are being used by the right companies. Because my biggest concern, and I bet you this is what's going to happen anyways, because they're actually not fixing the core problems, and from what I'm already hearing on the ground, is that it's harder and harder to get an LMIA for everybody. So again, in classic overcorrection form, they're not going to the root cause of the problem. They're now just making it harder for everybody. And what happens when you make it harder for everybody is the legitimate companies that actually need foreign talent stop using the programs. And it's just the fraudsters that continue. So not only are you not fixing the problem, you're actually making it worse, right? So this is my biggest complaint about these, effectively caps and shutting down of programs. It's not actually fixing the core problem. And I'm really concerned because a good chunk of our economy actually relies on legitimate temporary foreign workers for legitimate businesses. And those people are getting punished because of this. And I think it's a huge shame. Ken says 20 down to 10, return to prior levels. Okay, thanks, Ken, for confirming. Michelle says depends on the industry. Construction and healthcare are at 30%. Okay, interesting. So this percentage, and I say this because back when I was practicing, which was already at least a couple years ago, I was doing mostly GTS and high wage. So I do not have really any low wage experience. So this is helpful. So Michelle says that percentage is actually based on the industry. Ken says, agreed. Political theater, will it put more Canadians to work? Doubtful. Reduce fraud? Likely the opposite. Exactly. So this is, Ken, we're reading each other's minds here, as we normally do within our LinkedIn comments and posts. Again, if a company really wants to be fraudulently employing people, they'll find a way, especially if the market is as lucrative as it sounds like, right? Like from what I've heard, you can go into Facebook groups and see people make posts selling LMIAs for 30K, 40K, 50K. If someone's paying you 50K, you're going to find a way around this problem, right? But if you're a Canadian SMB and you're already finding it hard enough to pay the bills or to operate, profitably, are you going to go through the pain in the ass that is to get the pain in the ass of a process and cost to get an LMIA? It's going to be hard. It's apparently already harder than ever. Processing times are slower than ever. So you're not even going to bother, right? So as Ken put it, it's probably going to not only not reduce fraud, it might even do the opposite. Things like this actually are better for the fraudsters than for the legitimate employers, which is maybe the biggest shame of all. So anyways, it's very sad to see. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Hopefully it plays out. I don't know. I don't think it's going to play out positively, but I don't want to be too negative here. Michelle says, many of those. Now, I want some of you to know I'm reading out these comments. Michelle, Ken, Andra, Jorge. These are all regulated immigration professionals who are very smart. So I'm lucky because today I've got some really awesome sidekicks in the comments. Michelle says many of those low-wage jobs are skilled positions that can be applied under the PR stream. It's not going to change anything. All the found counter attendants will now be food service supervisors again to get around the caps. So I think, Michelle, what you're saying is that basically what they're going to do is kind of what I alluded to, is pick a different stream. So instead of using the low-wage stream, they'll just use the high-wage stream. Or as you said, the PR stream, and use different knock codes or whatever it's called now, right? The tiers or the knock codes, just to get around the caps or whatever it is. Sad to see, sad to hear, such is life. Andrew says, some of my clients applying directly on Job Bank get asked for money. Wow. So I'll explain Andrew's comment for those of you who don't know what the Job Bank is basically when you're applying for an LMIA as a company, in most cases, unless you're exempt from the recruitment requirement, one of the requirements is you have to actively recruit for 30 days, a minimum of 30 days. And one of the sources where you're supposed to recruit for is what's called the Job Bank, right? The Canada Job Bank. Job Bank Canada, right? Which is basically a job board, right? It looks like this. It's a job board. Now, the problem is, if you go, like, I've heard from so many aspiring immigrants who actually try to look for a job on the job bank and they never get a response. Why do they never get a response? Because companies are basically posting jobs on the job bank just so that they can meet that 30-day requirement, but they're not actually looking to hire you, right? They already have someone they want to sponsor through an LMIA, and they're just going through the motions of posting the job on the job bank. Now, what Andra is saying, which is going even a step further, is that apparently some companies, some of the fraudsters, will post a job on the job bank, and if you apply, they'll say, hey, yeah, we'll give you this job, just pay us tens of thousands of dollars, and then we'll sponsor you through an LMIA. So the irony is that the fraud is happening openly on the Canadian government job bank, right? Which is pretty nuts. So anyways, it's very sad to see. Ken says bingo. It's very sad to see. Again, I think there are huge underlying issues that are going on in this entire immigration ecosystem, and none of them are being addressed by these new changes by the government. And I hope that we start to see more of them that actually go to the root of the problem. And in this case specifically, I think it's doubly sad because our economy is so important and so fragile right now. And we need to give, like, people mistakenly think, especially these days, all immigration is bad. But most people who don't work in the industry don't understand that, for example, healthcare, agriculture would probably not exist at all if it wasn't for foreign workers and immigration. There are some of these, I'm not saying every industry, but there are some industries where immigration, and more specifically temporary foreign workers, are actually so important. And what you don't realize is that you're effectively shutting them down with policies like this. You're not going to the root cause of the problem. You're not solving it. And this might not actually be good for, number one, all the fraud, and number two, our economy. So anyways, I'll end my rant there. Abhinav says, Andra says the foreign national side. Okay, so Andra's providing the link to the foreign national side. So if you are, now again, I'm going to make a caveat here. If you are an aspiring immigrant trying to find a job in Canada, this is the link, and I'll make sure it's in the comments on YouTube as well. This is the link for the candidate side. Now, I unfortunately have to give you this warning. You might run into situations that Andra alluded to, which is some of these employers might actually ask you for money, which, by the way, is illegal in Canada. So if a company asks you for money, you know right away that they're breaking the law. So I would recommend not pursuing that opportunity. The other thing I'll say is, don't expect to get too many responses, because as I mentioned, and I hate that I even have to say this, because this is not how this job bank should work, is that you might have a hard time getting responses because most of the companies are posting their job just to go through the motion so that they can check the box so that they can apply for the LMIA for the employee that they already have picked anyways. All right, I'm going to stop sounding like a grandpa here, an old kind of ratchety grandfather complaining about, these days. Abhinav says, I remember when I got PR 5 years ago and was planning my move. I was applying for a job here and never heard back. Yeah, exactly. So, again, I hate that I have to say it, but it's just the reality. And part of why I have this show is that so people can, number one, apparently my rants are kind of entertaining, but number two, shedding light on the reality, right? Sometimes the sad reality of how all this stuff works. So anyways, that's it for our second topic. I expect, especially if there's a future change in government, we will continue to see a lot of changes. Maybe not a lot, but we will continue to see some changes on the corporate side of immigration. So are we going to see other changes to different LMIA streams, to the other types of work permits, right? Time will tell, and I will certainly keep an eye out. Ken says capping immigration is not solving housing, healthcare issues, or cost of living generally, nor is it likely to put more Canadians to work. Generally, TFWs fill jobs Canadians do not want. It costs more to bring in TFWs. Exactly. So again, something that most people don't realize, especially those who just, I'm not saying this is like that many people, but a lot of people who have just become anti all immigration, is you don't realize that, for example, let me share my screen again. This picture on the job bank, this is probably a farm in like southwestern Ontario or whatever, some other part of Canada. Most people don't realize that 50, 60, 70,000 plus agricultural workers come into Canada every year to go work on the farms because Canadians aren't willing to do them, right? So maybe the most important part of our country, food, right? If we don't have food, we're all gone within a month. Right? Apparently you can live on water for like up to 30 days. No, apparently you can live without water for like 3-4 days, but you can live without food if you have water for up to like 30 days, roughly. Anyways, that's kind of random. But one of the most important parts for our world here in Canada is eating food. If we didn't have any temporary foreign workers, we'd run out of food. Because, everyone my age wants to go be a TikTok influencer. Nobody wants to go work on a farm and pick berries and stuff like that, right? So if we got rid of immigration, say goodbye to the agricultural food industry in Canada, right? Like Ken said, capping low-wage LMIAs, not solving our current crazy cost of living issue. Healthcare, right? We don't have enough workers in our hospitals. How is capping immigration going to solve that problem? Right? So anyways, sounds like we're all very much on the same page here, which is always a nice thing. I'm going to continue on to one of our other favorite topics, express entry. It's actually not a terribly long conversation on express entry this week. One sec as I take the patented Segway sip. I think we have one more comment here. I just want to check because, as many of you know, I have a gripe with LinkedIn Live because it doesn't auto-update comments sometimes for some reason. I don't really know why. But anyways, I will put a link to this as well in the comments for anyone who wants to follow along. What we had is last week, so the 26th and the 27th, we had two more express entry draws. And what we're seeing here is a pretty common theme. What IRCC has seemed to have done is moved away from the all-program draw. So last week on the 26th, we had a PNP draw inviting 1,100 people to apply and change. And then the next day on the 27th, a CEC draw inviting 3,300 people to apply. And then maybe more notably, there was no industry-specific draw. Now the pattern we're seeing here is, number one, they seem to be doing PNP and CEC pretty much every time. And then it looks like every other time mixing in an industry-specific draw, in most cases, French language, right? So for example, here was a PNP and a CEC draw. The wave before that was a PNP and a CEC draw with a French language draw. The wave before that was, again, just a PNP and a CEC draw. The wave before that was a PNP, CEC, and a French language proficiency draw. And then the wave before that was a whole bunch of industry specific. So the last four waves, it's been PNP and CEC or PNP and CEC and French language. So for example, my guess would be in the middle of September, we might see another PNP and CEC draw potentially accompanied by a French language proficiency draw, because this time they didn't include one. Now, I've talked about this many times on the show, so I'm not going to go deep down into this topic again. Why they're prioritizing French language so much, especially when they just announced that we're having issues with, for example, healthcare. Where are all the healthcare draws? Where are the trades draws? Where are the STEM draws? This government seems extremely fixated on French, whether it be through the industry-specific draws or the most recent exemption that they're making to the study permit limit for French-speaking students. Very focused on French. Again, my best guess is probably, these are for political reasons. They want to appease Quebec, or they want to appease, I don't know, all the other French speakers. I don't know. But I'm surprised not to see more mixing up of the industry-specific draws. If you have any thoughts, any hunches on where this is going to go in the future, please let me know. But clearly IRCC is getting pretty comfortable with their PNP CEC, which I don't necessarily disagree with that. We have a lot of temporary residents inside Canada, so it might be a better decision to get all them into the PR category if it makes sense. But again, I don't understand why they've only pretty much been doing these French language proficiency draws. I thought we needed healthcare workers. I thought we needed STEM. I thought we needed construction. I thought we needed ag. So why aren't we using those draws as well? Anyways, food for thought, as they say. Last but not least, I just want to go through a couple quick updates on the Visto front and the immigration content front. So as many of you know, Visto is a Canadian immigration platform, so we provide immigration law firms with automation, AI, tools, all that kind of stuff to prepare immigration applications a lot quicker, give their clients better user experience, etc., etc. I always like to plug, first and foremost, the Canadian Immigration Pros podcast. If you haven't checked it out, you can watch the episodes on YouTube or you can listen on your favorite podcast platform. I will include a link in the comments so that you have it if you're interested. We cover a wide range of topics. I interview immigration professionals on study permits, SUV, work permits, LMIA fraud. We have episodes on, a whole bunch of stuff. You can see here, growing an immigration firm, spousal sponsorship appeals, AIP, temporary foreign worker program, whole bunch of stuff, JRs, international students, like really wide range. I quite like it. I'm obviously a little bit biased, but I quite like it. So I recommend checking it out if you want some more Canadian immigration content. And if you like my style and my, rants and stuff like that, you'll certainly hear more of those as well. Ken says, this trend continues, volumes drop, thresholds increase. Yes, good show, client meetings, ciao. Thanks, Ken. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Glad that you enjoyed and enjoy the rest of your day as well. And then the last thing I wanted to mention here is the latest feature update. So what we've added into Visto last week is, as many of you know, we have many features to help you prepare, gather, organize, Canadian immigration documents and stuff like that. And so one thing that we had requested from our clients, because I'm always talking to the law firms that are using Visto, getting their feedback to help make it better, is, hey Josh, Visto makes it really easy to collect everything, but I want to review my client's entire application all in one place, right? I don't want to have to flip between their supporting documents and their forms and blah, blah, blah. So Alex, who's our CTO, whipped up this nifty bird's eye view page. So this is accessible for any applications that you're prepping in Visto. And what you can do is, once your client's completed everything, you can adjust the columns here. You can now basically preview and compare everything on one screen. So let's say I want to go through my client's intake form and review all of their questions, but I also want to compare their answers to the documents that they've given me, right? So I can pull up the form here and I can scroll through and I can read all their answers, or I can jump to their passport information and I can then pull up their passport, right? Here's their passport. I click a button. Now I can see their fake passport and compare it. Just pretend like this information's filled in, right? This is my fake account here. I would obviously never pull up real people's information on screen. But anyways, what you can see here is you can go here, oh, passport, okay, cross-check with the passport, make sure it makes sense. Maybe I want to go to, marital status. I want to check the marital status, but I want to compare it with the marriage certificate, right? So I just can go into marital status. I can compare it with the marriage certificate. These are obviously, right, all fake PDFs. But anyways, just one view. You can compare everything, quick, easy, convenient. That's kind of the name of the game for us, right? We want to make practicing, preparing these immigration applications, helping your clients as quick and easy and efficient as possible. So that's it for there. If you are interested in learning more, definitely check out our website at Visto.ai. If you haven't figured that one out by now, then you're sleeping under a rock. But anyways, So that is it, what I wanted to cover there in terms of updates, new features, that kind of stuff. Andrew says, I think the cap on low wage is going to bring down the EE scores as less people get that additional 50 points for LMIA job offers. Maybe bring down the EE scores. It could, Andrew. What I usually look at, and it's an interesting comment that I don't necessarily disagree with, but what I usually look at, and again, this is just kind of like one way to do it, is I keep an eye on the size of the draws. And here's why. Because every month that goes by, more and more people become eligible for express entry and or express interest for express entry, right? So every month, X amount of people join the pool. And every month, almost every month, IRCC does some draws, right? And so what I've noticed over the years, because I've been tracking express entry for years and years, right, is not saying that you haven't, is what I've noticed is a good way to get an idea for if these score requirements are going to go up and down. One of the ways, now one of the factors to look at is what you just mentioned, but the other thing to look at is how big are the draws. If IRCC is doing relatively small draws, which I would say they kind of are now, they're relatively small, the scores do not go down that fast. Why? Because even though they're inviting a couple thousand people at a time, the pool is still being replenished just as quickly or more, or even more quickly by all these new candidates, right? If IRCC isn't doing big enough draws, then they're not actually breaking into the current, what do they call it? Like volume in the pool, right? Like, look at this. There's over, so this is as of August 27th. There's over 200,000 people in the pool. So if IRCC is only inviting 1,000, 500, 2,000, 2,500 people at a time, it's not actually shrinking the pool in a meaningful enough way that is really going to make a big change on the score requirements, right? Because that's what a lot of people don't realize is IRCC doesn't pick scores out of thin air, right? The way that they actually pick the scores is based on the number of people they want to invite. So, and this is more so for the aspiring immigrants who maybe don't know how express entry works that well, is they don't wake up one day and say, okay, today we want to do a draw for 520. No, they say today we want to invite 10,000 people. So what they do is they go into the pool and they say, okay, well, there's 127 people with a score above 601, and there's 97,000 people and change with a score above 501. So if I want to invite 10,000 people, I need to find the 10,000th person from the top and figure out what their score is. In this case, the 10,000th person would probably be something in the range of like the high 490s, right? So that's how they come up with the score. They first decide how many people they want to invite, and that determines what the score is, right? So that's why I'm saying what you say, I don't disagree with, Andra, and I think it will definitely be a factor. But if they continue to not do huge amounts of draws, I don't think it will actually have much of an effect at all on the score requirement, just from a math perspective. Michelle says the LMIAs can be filed under the PR stream, so I don't see the caps making much of a difference for express entry because those applicants will be skilled workers that are eligible for the PR stream instead of the low wage stream. Interesting, and that's what Michelle mentioned earlier, which is another great point, right? So if those workers are eligible for express entry either way, they just won't apply through the low wage stream, they'll apply through the PR stream. So it won't actually affect the number of people in the express entry pool, so it may not have much of an effect at all on the express entry scores, which I think makes a lot of sense as well. So this is really good stuff, and it's kind of everything I wanted to cover on the show today. We actually went a little bit longer than usual, partially because we had some great attendance in the chat. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you to everybody who tuned in live. Thank you very much for taking part in the conversation. Hope you found it interesting. Hopefully you found it helpful. And always curious to hear more thoughts, and I'll continue to share my thoughts, number one, every 2 weeks when I go live on the Visto show, and number two, on LinkedIn as well, so make sure we're connected there. If you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, really appreciate you tuning in. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps. And if you're interested in joining the conversation, make sure to follow me on LinkedIn. I'll put a link to my LinkedIn profile in the description so that next time you can tune in live and take part of the conversation. Either way, thank you everybody for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the show. Larry says, great to see you in action again. Thanks, Larry, for tuning in. Thanks to everybody else who tuned in as well. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a great rest of your Friday. Hope you have a great weekend. And I am excited to see you in the next episode. Take care, everybody. Have a good one.